Hello and welcome to BIOS Ventures. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to welcome Jeffrey Lowe, principal at Novo Holdings, to the show. Jeffrey, thank you once again for joining us.
Great, thanks for having me.
To kick things off, Jeffrey, can you share a brief personal introduction with us today?
Great. Hi, I'm Jeffrey. I'm a principal at Novo Growth, part of Novo Holdings. Lead the practice at the intersection of life sciences and technology for our Novo Growth practice, and based in San Francisco and a native San Franciscan.
Great to have you on and to dive a little bit deeper. But before we do so, and you mentioned Novo Growth versus Novo Holdings, I'm sure there's also the Novo Foundation. Can you provide a brief introduction to Novo Holdings for us?
Yeah, so Novo Holdings is one of the world's largest life sciences investors, 130 billion AUM, permanent capital, sole LP investment firm focused solely on the life sciences. Our sole LP is the Novo Nordisk Foundation, so we invest on behalf of the wealth of that sole LP, and our capital is permanent. We are the controlling shareholder of Novo Nordisk and Novozymes, but we consider those our two biggest portfolio positions. We're not strategically tied in any way to what those holdings do, but treat them as our sort of permanent portfolio holdings. And across our firm, we're investing $1 to $2 billion a year in fresh capital in life sciences, the most broadly construed. We're organized by stage, and we're across all geographies. So we have a seeds team, a ventures team, a growth team, a principal investments team, and an Asia team. And we invest out of offices in San Francisco, Boston, London, Copenhagen, Singapore, and Shanghai. So life sciences, the most broadly construed, from early stage company creation, biotech, to cash flow positive businesses like CROs and things of that sort across geographies. Across our teams, we just think about life sciences wherever it is the most broadly construed. And on our growth side, we're investing $40 to $100 million as a first check on our growth team. Typically, we've quite an engaged investment model. We always take a board seat on the growth side. And we're happy to invest in companies that we see that are changing the face of life sciences.
Talking about an incredible breadth, and before we dive into it, would love to talk a little bit more about your own background, your journey to venture, and how it really began at Harvard, where you studied molecular and cellular biology, later receiving your MBA at HBS and your MD from Yale School of Medicine. And while you were a student, you got involved in several diverse healthcare venture internships, including DRX Capital, Novartis' venture fund, Capital G. So it's clear from the beginning you had a really significant passion for science and innovation, even from the early stage. And we'd love to kick things off just by asking what brought you to bio and why this intersection of the innovation as well as the business.
Yeah, let's say that startups brought me into medicine, and for medicine, found my way into investing. Grew up in San Francisco, third generation San Franciscan, and was doing research and working with a couple of surgeons in San Francisco. We're doing some research, published some papers, and they said, "Oh, we're pretty happy with that work. I like doing research." They said, "Hey, we're working on a company. Would you like to work on R&D for our company?" And I said, "Great." Had a great experience there. The company was backed by Ross Jaffe at Versant, was one of the lead partners, and Essex Woodlands and US Venture Partners. It ended up being, when I was 18 years old, a $725 million exit. And, so something that was incredibly exciting as somebody who was in high school. And I said, when I was 18 years old, I want to be involved in medical innovation for my career. How should I do that? So talk to the founders who are physicians, and then our lead venture investor, Ross Jaffe, is a physician as well. And they said, if you want to have a big impact on medical innovation, you should go to medical school like us. And so, I think when I started off, I thought I was going to be a physician founder, like the founders that I worked with. And that's what got me started. Went to Harvard for undergrad, did my basic research in immunology, went to Yale for med school, worked there on data in life sciences and biologics, and then had some mentors that said, I think you'd really benefit from going to Harvard Business School and learning some of the business side of things. And, I think that's how I got into trying investing as part of working with startups, which I continue to do along the way, trying and taking a look at the investing side. So really found my way from the startup side to medicine, and then to investing where I am today.
What an incredible breadth and journey. I mean, as you graduated from Harvard, graduated from Yale, you had these internships in growth equity, pharma venture, analyzing all of these high growth companies. What led you to pivot from there at the end of your academic career to the earlier stages of venture with Andreessen?
Yeah, at that time, Andreessen was starting a new bio fund. So I had at that point worked within Novartis Venture Fund. They were doing primarily therapeutics, really enjoyed that. Novartis also had a new digital health fund, DRX Capital, so doing the first deal out of that fund, which was Omada Health. So had that, seeing interesting new digital business models come along. And then Google Capital, or Capital G is called now, is looking into kind of growth healthcare businesses. So got a flavor of working at things on this intersection of life sciences, therapeutics, technology. And as A16Z was starting with BioFund, I interned there, really enjoyed my experience, and joined them full time. Really enjoy working with companies, I think, across stages. So they're primarily the early stage, but it's a strategy that was able to work from companies. Probably the smallest check size that I worked on while there was probably 2 million, and the largest was 100 probably. So quite a breadth.
No, absolutely. And I mean, while we're on this topic, you mentioned having mentors who made recommendations, getting involved in the innovation space early. And so as we think about this exposure you had early in your career, and we think about those who might be listening who are themselves earlier in their careers and seeking to pursue venture, do you have any advice for those in the audience who might be looking to follow a similar path?
I think it's talking to people and understanding, what is right for you. I think I talk to a lot of people that are considering a path from medicine, or they're trying to go to medical school for the purposes of going into venture capital. I think often that is a hard path, that if you're saying, I want to be a venture capitalist, and so I need to go to medical school for the purposes of getting a job in venture, I think that's a difficult path, because there's a lot of sacrifices into going into medicine. But if you're enjoying everything along your path, if you're really interested by the science, I think it's finding the best way to express and apply the interest you have. And that may be in something very clinical, maybe something in very basic science. It may be something, business oriented. Once you find those interests and passions and what excites you, you're going to find and hopefully surround yourself with mentors that are going to help you achieve those interests. And so for me, I think I found my way into venture not by plan, kind of haphazardly, but it's been a really good fit between the things that I got into medicine for, which was really driving innovation in the healthcare system. And I've really enjoyed that experience, and so it's I think it's a very particular one for every individual, and so I enjoy talking to a lot of people about that journey for themselves.
And you're right. I think that's a great point to keep in mind, that there is no one path, there is no one fit. And so as you move forward in your own careers, as we move forward in our careers, trying to understand why we're pursuing the paths we do, that's always an interesting question. And it's always fun to learn from people to see where they're coming from. So taking out for a moment the fact that you have your MD, MBA, you're experienced in the medicine, pharma, science, early stages of venture, as well as growth stage, all of which really just makes you a perfect fit for your current role. Taking that aside and saying, why are you a fit for them? We'd love to understand why Novo for you.
Novo is a place with a great vision and purpose. I think the goal is to continue to go and fund biomedical science. So most venture capital is funded by institutional LPs, or a lot of the big funds are. And many of them are funding great causes, some of them for universities, some are for charities. And I think Novo Holdings is no different. The Novo Nordisk Foundation is one of the largest funders of primarily scientific research out there. And so the things that we invest in, I think in themselves are for a great purpose, but the returns we generate are for mostly funding, great advances in the basic science. So at the end of the day, the work that we do for our companies is about commercializing science, and then the returns we generate go back into funding science. So, I think it has really, a great purpose, And then two, I think this is a really unique platform in that it is one of the largest investment organizations in life sciences in the world, 130 billion AUM. We're investing $1 billion+ a year in companies. The most broadly construed, and that lets us go and one, have a deep expertise in life sciences. And then the way that we're structured is permanent capital. And so without the restriction of a defined fund length, we can go and be investors for a very long time. And our ideal investment is one that is going to continue to generate a financial return, over a many-year period. And we can continue to be part of the journey with that company if we find, the right partnership. That is something that makes us structured a little bit differently than other investment firms out there.
Absolutely, and those are great points of differentiation. And so we want to build a little bit on those differentiators and ask, can you describe a little bit more about what you look for in your diligence process? When you're evaluating companies, how do you separate the signal from the noise? And how does the Novo process really differ?
Yeah, so happy to talk, especially to things on our growth team. Each of our teams has a separate team, a different strategy, and different types of companies and different things they're looking at because they're different stages and different geographies. But at the growth stage, I think we're looking at a few things. I mean, one, do we have a company and team that is in a space that I think that there's a lot of interest, that there is a strong market potential. So I think the deals that have done best for me in my career were ones we're often partnering with a very visionary founder that really knows their space or has a really unique edge and market insight. And so we're looking for somebody like that to partner. And hopefully that edge and market insight is something in a market trend that we think has a lot of interest, and something that we certainly do go and validate, with our focus in life sciences and our network in life sciences. We want to be focused on something that's going to be, pushing the field forward. And then at the growth stage, something we are looking for, certainly is there evidence of market traction? And is this something that, if we can go and understand that this is the team and, this is the market, do we have the support and evidence that, hey, this is starting to work? This is typically in growth. We are working with businesses that have some traction of some sort. They may have business development deals. They may have early sales, depending on the type of business. It's often at the very beginning of commercialization, but we want those proof points that the business is starting to accelerate forward, and that there's some room that we can be, a great partner to expand the business.
And as we think about that expansion, and we're on the topic broadly, do you have any recommendations then for founders who are reaching out to Novo Growth? Any key criteria they should be conveying, any ways of connecting or presenting where they are today?
We like to just have a dialogue and get to know people over time. I would say, if we reflect back on, the markets in 2020, 2021, where I think it was more difficult for us were when founders came and said, hey, we're running a process. This is the first time we're speaking. We expect a term sheet, in the next week. I think that becomes more difficult for us because as our model is to go and partner with companies over the very long term, we'd like to get to know people. And it's often easier to go and have conviction in a business for the long term and to put significant capital at work and be, a very aligned partner when we get to know people, even before the company is maybe a fit for our criteria. But if we can go and get to know a company, start getting up to speed and get some thoughts on the space, having a team go and say, hey, here's where we think this business is going. And then, it's great when they come back and say, well, we've delivered on that promise. That makes it so that when the time does come, that it's the right round for us or time to invest, and we were able to invest, across the organization, a lot of stages of the company, then we can kind of get to conviction, quite quickly and be a long-term, partner. Often a great place for us to come into is to be the first life sciences investor in a company. Tempest, for example, was a company that we backed pretty early on in its commercialization journey. Its investors at that time were primarily tech investors, and we came in as the first life sciences investor in the company. And I think because of the experience that I have working with people on the tech side and translating what some of the needs are on the life sciences side, I think that's a conversation that we can have with management at the board level. And because we are deeply, as an organization, focused on life sciences, we can go be a different and additive voice in the boardroom. Whereas some investors out there, if you're used to only working with life science investors, there's just a different language to speak. But we think that there's a huge value in putting together the expertise on the tech side and the life sciences side. If you can communicate together, I think you can go and build really interesting companies, and we're seeing that in our portfolio and hoping for that as the market continues forward.
No, absolutely. And that's something where normally we love to focus on better understanding how you work with companies, but as we're on this topic, and as we think about that lengthy life cycle of life sciences and healthcare companies, building, as you're describing, teams and company cultures with intentionality can really be critical. And so as you think about Novo's investment for the long term, helping scale these companies and helping think about bringing together folks at the intersection of tech and bio, do you have any thoughts or recommendations you could share here around how Novo supports those interdisciplinary teams and long-lasting company cultures?
Yeah, I think that there's a wide range of how we go and work with companies. A company like Tempus, for example, Eric Lefkofsky, the CEO, was the CEO of Groupon. He's an experienced founder, and he's somebody that knows how to build a company. And so, for us coming in there as first life science investor, that was to bring a different perspective. And so for him, he has done very well operationally for that business. And so we often can go and help him in ways of, we'll have thoughts, or he'll ask us to, help him with, what we've seen in the market on a certain trend. If he's pursuing some new strategy, how other folks may have pursued something similar, so that he can figure out the best idea for it. But he has generally gone and performed well, and that's something where we try and be helpful in the ways that we can be helpful. Another company that we work with, Exscientia, we were the first institutional capital in that business. The CEO was a first-time CEO, and so for us, it was how do we go and surround him and with a really great team, so both on the management side as well as an experienced board. And so working with Andrew in that case to go and build a strategy for the business to be a public company, go and build a syndicate with both tech and life sciences investors, get a really strong management team around him, and also professionalize the board so that the business can be ready to be a strong and long-lasting company. We're happy to work with companies in the best way that's going to add the most value for it. We are very engaged investors, but I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all model for every single company that we work with.
I have to strongly agree with that. And I think that's also a great way to loop things back and maybe chat about the portfolio a little bit more broadly. You've had a great track record of investment at Novo involving companies such as, forgive me, Exscientia, which you just mentioned, Verona Health. And so as an investor with this broad investment cycle that you're considering, can you share more about how you consider where to invest and how you develop your investment theses? With a few $1 billion and so many stages of consideration, how do you narrow the scope?
Yeah, I think there has to be, a balance between having founders. I think some people have the opinion of like, hey, founders are going to tell us the future, and we're focused on meeting those best founders and seeing those ideas and partnering with them. And some people say, hey, I want to go and figure out spaces that are interesting, map those areas, meet all the companies in the space. And I think for us and for myself, there's a balance between those. Is sometimes that you see a founder that is themselves particularly special, or that the traction of the business and the insight that they have is, one that we think is something that we haven't seen before. And so, you're always compelled by, the companies that you see in front of you. And other times, and front health and real world data is a place to go and take a look at a trend in the market and, see the companies that are out there and figure out, well, if I like this trend in the market, what are the characteristics of a company that, are really interesting, for us. And, in that space, it was, proprietary data for indications that are, interesting and underserved. You can have a thesis going into a space and make an investment, based on that thesis. So it depends on the maturity of the space, and it, depends on what businesses there are, but we're always open to meeting people, either proactively or, getting introduced.
And it's always good, it feels like, to have that breadth of flexibility, optionality, willingness to see, learn, explore from all fronts and all perspectives. So speaking of market trends, given everything happening at this time and Novo's ability to invest across so many stages and gaining that incredible intersectional perspective, we'd love to ask sort of a broad question intentionally, but what are your thoughts on this moment in biotech?
Yeah, this is one in which we as an organization are one in which we're permanent capital. We try to think for the long term. And, I think sometimes that means in our investment process, we try to go and think about what is the sort of steady state, long-term future of this business. Sometimes the current market cycles in which we're investing, if you're in 2021, a lot of times those prices were high, and, those multiples were high, those comps were high. And, if we thought about where we thought this business would be in 5 years and 10 years, it's hard to say that this would be the new normal and future. And in that time, I think we were outbid on many businesses. As we think of where there is opportunity now, is we still see the trends in innovation, in science, in market needs. They're all still there, and it's about finding the companies that we're excited about at a price that makes sense for us to be a long-term partner at. And so we want to go and see where can we partner with a company that we think is going to compound value over the at least medium and ideally long term, and we can be partners and invest in a company that we think has a lot of upside. So we have seen a lot of groups that were not long-term investors of life sciences sort of leave the field. All we do is invest in life sciences, and we're ready and willing to write checks. And I think it's about finding, companies that share that mentality of building a business that's going to create long-term value. And that's the type of businesses we'd like to work with.
As you think about having those partnerships, you've talked a lot about a focus on the team, it feels like. And so as you think about that from a partnership perspective, and you've touched on this as well, what does being a good partner to your portfolio companies mean to you?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, I think it means figuring out where the company is and what type of engagement and help that they need. So I think that's quite different from companies where it's repeat CEO in the same space. A company that backed a previous firm, Jonathan Lim, at Araska. He's been a multiple company CEO, has exited companies for over $1 billion. He knows his space really well, and he's a very experienced CEO. For somebody like that is, hey, how can I be helpful and not be in your way? And so for somebody like that, I try to help them in areas where I'm like, hey, I know this space, or maybe this is not a place where your team should be spending its primary time, but I think there's some future value for the business, and we can add some value here. For some other companies, it's, hey, a experienced executive, but first-time CEO, helping think through the vision, the first-time CEO issues. First-time founders is, often thinking through those vision issues, the execution issues, going and building a board, building a management team. Does the company need new things around strategy? And then also managing the dynamics of the boardroom. So, many of the players that are also investing with us out there are people that we've known from other companies and other boards. And I think this is a time, especially where boards that are, well aligned, I think that is, something that makes it just much easier, as there are a lot of companies out there that, need to help, and we all need to be rowing in the same direction, relative to companies where, you are trying to figure out, what to do, but nobody in the board can agree. Well, that's certainly, a lot more work.
And that's actually one aspect would love to dive into deeper, because sitting on the board of a company is a responsibility, at least we think many are familiar with, but from a day-to-day perspective might not know as much about. And so given you've been everything from an observer to a board member with early stage companies to later stage growth companies, can you share what that's like as you think about how do you build a board, manage a board, board dynamics, engaging with the executive team? I know there's a lot there. And so just generally would love any thoughts, tips or tricks. How do you be a good board member? How can someone live up to that role well?
Yeah, I think you need to figure out where the company is and what the company needs. Often an early stage company, the founder may be very reliant on you as their only or their primary investor in helping think through, how do I think through the vision of this company? How do I communicate it? How do I think about strategy? How do I make my first hires? And so in the very early stage, you have a really different relationship often, with the founder. In there, I really aspire to be, the first call in that. I think you mentioned on board observers as well. Sometimes the board observer is less intimidating than the board member. As the first, one of my first bosses said, he's like, and this was not a company I was a board observer on, but just an advisor to the company. He's like, the reason that it's just easier to speak to you and I can and run everything by you is because my board, technically they could fire me. But if you're an advisor to this company, I need somebody that I can share the ups and downs of being a CEO with. And I think if you're a board observer or board member that can instill that sort of confidence, that you can be that first call, good or bad, I think that's something that is often easiest to go into at the early stages of the company, but is something that is great to aspire to at all stages. And then as you get later, it's going to say, well, how can I add value to this business? What are the ways in which I can work with the other board members and the management team to help accelerate things? As the company gets later stage, there are more directors, the company is bigger. And, often when you come in later to the company, you don't have the same relationship as you do with a company that you might have worked with since the seed or Series A, but you can hopefully you're coming in there and being able to add a new voice and a productive voice to a conversation that's already there. So I think as all companies, it's not one size fits all, but it's about understanding what the dynamics are, what the relationship with the founder is, and where you can be, the most helpful and go from there.
And as we actually maybe dive in on that point a little bit deeper, and as we think about being the most helpful, there are oftentimes, so far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, circumstances where members of the board will transition, especially as the board goes through those different growth stages. And so how do you think about from the sense of balancing that company responsibility, but also investor like fiduciary duty? Is it where do you maybe say, I'd love to take an observer seat, but we know you need this type of expertise. Let's find someone in our network and they can take the board seat. Is there ever how do you think about striking that balance out of curiosity?
Yeah, we see, I think often we're part of evolutions of boards and companies we invest in. We always take a board seat within our growth mandate, but we see a lot of companies that we work with, often there may be, sometimes there are seed investors on the board or early stage investors, and the business goes and its current state, that's not the expertise anymore of that particular investor. And sometimes they will want to switch to an observer role. Or you may start considering restructuring the board because at some point when you have too many people in the room, the board dynamic just becomes less effective. And so those are things that we think about. We also think about professionalizing the board. So we aspire for many of our companies aspire to be public companies. And in those cases, you do want to have a preponderance of independent directors. And so we are often thinking about how do we over time add independent directors that are going to be able to have the skill sets and qualifications necessary to be a good public company. And so we've been a part of adding and building those expertise into the companies that we invest in.
That all makes a lot of sense. And as we touched on this topic of hiring, and this is a little bit broader, I think, than just at the board level, but a strong point, and rightly today, is the focus on diversity, equity, inclusion of founders, of board members, and teams more broadly. And so given your equity investments range from the earliest stages all the way through to growth and beyond, do you have any learnings or takeaways as we seek to ensure DE&I are incorporated into team building? And how can we as investors provide that sort of support to the founders as they build their teams and move forward?
DEI is something that's very important to Novo Holdings. We have a team and framework that we bring to companies. And over time, I mean, we do have a practice that does bioindustrial investing, in which often there's more climate and other environmental impacts. Often on the life sciences side, the investments themselves are inherently good things for health, and their impact on the environment, that's not a primary concern of theirs. So often it's around governance and making sure that we can ensure that there's diversity on them. So often we go and use our networks to make sure that we have candidates being considered. We brought many women, very qualified women, to the boards of some of the companies we work with. Jennifer Doudna was added to Tempus's board. Elizabeth Crane, who's the COO of the investment bank Moelis, added to the Exscientia board. And so we're always trying to make sure that the company is having in its network and in pipeline at the board or executive level people of diverse backgrounds of all types. And so that's something, as we want to make sure that the companies get the best person possible. Part of getting the best person possible is making sure that a diverse range of candidates are in the pipeline and considered.
And it sounds like providing that degree of access that you do makes a huge difference to making sure those candidates are found and consider the positions for themselves. So we know it's always near impossible to choose, but we always like to ask, are there any portfolio companies you really want to take this time to highlight? Any shameless plugs you want to put out on their behalf?
Yeah, I mean, I think Exscientia is an example of a company, and our full work of a company from an early stage to its being a public company. So Exscientia was, I think, one of the first deals worked on when joining Novo Holdings. Had gotten to know the AI and drug discovery space very well. Worked on in vitro and Genesis and other companies in the space. And what really struck me about Exscientia when we invested as the first institutional investors was they had brought drugs from target to development candidates 5+ times in about 12 months. At that time, the industry average is about 4 years. And so to go and see a company go and do something very difficult and do it not once, not twice, but 5+ times in multiple therapeutic areas, in their own hands and with multiple partners, I think that was something that really intrigued us. And we got to know the company and management well. And it was one that, we saw an opportunity to go and capitalize it well, to help develop a strategy that we thought was more sustainable over the long term, and to go and build a management team and board that, was very effective. And so, in our first week of investing there, I had done a lot of research on Array Pharma, which is another company that had, we thought, a lot of similarities to Exscientia. As one in which they were a chemistry-based platform. Exscientia is a chemistry-based platform using active learning to go and speed up the time and quality of chemistry. And both of those companies, chemistry-based platform, one in Boulder, Colorado, one in Oxford in the UK, and Array very successful on its business development side, but in terms of its in terms of the assets that came out of there, developing some of the assets of Loxo, Cascade, Mirati, so scientifically incredibly successful, but in terms of the deals, the amount of capital that they were able to capture from milestones from that, $19 billion or thereabouts of value created for its partners, less than 100 million they were able to capture. So scientific success, business failure from that perspective. They were ultimately, had a nice acquisition from asset they got back that was not due to their own strategy for Federal Trade Commission reasons. They got back an asset that they had given away, and that's what drove a lot of their acquisition value. So we said, how do we create a business model that can go and make sure that if we're successful scientifically, we can be successful as a business as well. So helped develop a business plan that's the current business strategy, helped go and recruit an excellent CFO and other executives to the company and help professionalize the board, make introductions for crossover investment. And I think important to myself was, this often companies in the space are funded primarily by tech investors. I wanted to make sure that we got life science investors who were just professional life science investors in. I think that's really important for companies in this category. So we're able to bring some of those in the crossover and ultimately to a successful, IPO. And so it's a company that, we think AI drug discovery is one that is, quite interesting, and this platform focused on chemistry and then them bringing in more biological capability into the company is one that we're really excited about, and we think continues to be, a leader in the space.
I've got so many questions we can jump off from there, but I want to focus on one of the points you said, and that was really a phenomenal story. So thank you for sharing it, Jeffrey. But today, it feels like we're seeing as much innovation on the business side as the science side of especially tech bio. And that innovation can at times be ahead of the market, which means term setting and go-to-market strategy can be a little bit challenging. So bearing in mind, and as we've said throughout, there's not really a one-size-fits-all. But can you share more about your thoughts for the go-to-market strategy for this next wave, or this current wave even, of tech bio companies?
Yeah, we're seeing more companies try to go and combine and look into combining service businesses and asset businesses. In various times, we've written that sometimes, depending on what services you're providing, some of the service businesses you're providing, life sciences, you have to make sure that you're going to be able to generate enough value so that this can be a venture backable business. It's fine if this is not a venture backable business, but you can't go and raise venture funding with a business model that just doesn't generate enough value. And so that is, one thing that we take a look at for sure is, does the business generate enough value to justify continuing to be funded as a venture funded business? And then, we see companies historically go and try to monetize via their pipeline alone. Sometimes they have the expertise to do that. Sometimes they don't. And I think we're seeing more companies now try to put these business models together. Often it can be a balance. And we'll see if companies figure out the right balance between those two. And we often find that it is quite difficult to go and balance two different business models. But I think we're open-minded to going to see what is going to happen out there. But does the company have a business model that can generate enough value? And do they have the expertise and organization and focus to execute on this? Those are things that we're looking for.
That all makes sense. And I mean, it sounds very similar to our internal thinking, which we've sort of coined as Stepwise Bio. Starting from that platform perspective, acting almost as a partnered service company, bringing in that capital efficiency, the learnings from those partnerships, and then transitioning over time to, as you say, the true financial value add, which tends to come from a therapeutics product and asset perspective. And so as you transition from one stage to the other, and you're using that tech integrated biological platform to really accelerate biological insight generation, I think you find that companies are in a strong position at that point, at least.
Yeah, I think what we like to see is companies really, in that first stage, do you generate enough value, enough data to be really interesting? I think what becomes more difficult is this two-stage rocket program to go and say, well, the thing we're doing right now, we all know this is not particularly interesting, but that enables this other rocket ship later. That often is more difficult for us. We think that the first thing has to come up with something that is fundamentally really interesting, either from a data perspective or from a business perspective. And then you can build, more and expand the business on top of that. But if the first thing, and you get to the end of it and people say, so what? It's just really hard to build that second stage of the business to something that's going to create a lot of value.
No, agreed. You can't start with the horse and buggy and claim the F-15s on its way.
Yeah.
Maybe just expanding this slightly. You've talked about active learning, AI for drug discovery, and it's clear that from the beginning of your career, you've had a very future-forward and most regularly tech-enabled investment perspective in bio. So would love to ask, what have you been seeing from founders, from academia, from the startup community in general, in terms of the next cycle of emerging technologies? We'd really just love to understand, Jeffrey, what are you most excited by?
Yeah, one thing that we're seeing and what I've been waiting for a while is that we had this first wave of companies and Exantium recursions that were sort of out in front in the AI drug discovery space. And then I was seeing, companies in sort of that next generation, but a lot of the lessons from those leading companies were not quite getting back into the ecosystem because a lot of the employees were still, locked up, in those original companies. Now we're starting to see a lot of those employees spin out, start their own companies, and they're taking with them a lot of the insights of what they learned in that first company. And I think some of those are going to be, really interesting alumni communities and really, interesting businesses out there. Of course, people are coming out with, various LLM or AlphaFold, based technologies. I think for us in the growth side, I think a lot of these things are, quite interesting, but, it takes a little bit of while to go and say, well, how do I take a technology? And a lot of these are at the technology stage and make them an interesting business. We're, wanting to see the application of a lot of these things into new modalities, into antibodies, into cars and, other novel formats, or just new technology or science-based modalities, period. And so, it takes some time for these to diffuse through, but we're seeing really interesting talent and new technologies get repurposed in interesting ways.
Oh, and turning that around slightly, is there anything you think might not yet be ready for prime time that you're excited to see coming next?
Everybody now is trying to come with a generative AI story. So we're seeing a lot of generative AI stories out there, and we're seeing existing businesses go and say, hey, here's a part of our business that can be accelerated by generative AI. Some of those, we'll see what impact those have on businesses. I think those may be the ones that are ready soonest to have some sort of product addition or adjacency to an existing business. And then we're seeing a lot of things that are just coming up in the beginning, and all of those are going through the same business model ideation issues that the many companies in the space have gone through. And so we're excited to see where that comes. And I think over time, there's going to be something really, a number of things really interesting coming there. But, at this exact moment, it's wait and see.
That all makes sense. And as we project out into the future and project out even further, do you mind if we ask what's almost missing in the world that you envision in, let's say, 2040, 2050? Do you have any calls for startups that you'd love to see change the space in the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I think, technology goes and digitizes every part of life sciences. I think a lot of people are focused on drug discovery, but there's, significant parts of the pharma ecosystem from, commercial to manufacturing to early stage research to development and trials. A lot of pharma is on Excel right now. And so there's, I think a lot of technology that are in other parts of our economy that we can see in life sciences. And then, within the core of drug discovery, we think AI can be a component of, a lot of these things. It'll be a tool that, I think will be useful across many things. And I think a number of companies are going to figure out how to go and reorganize the way they discover drugs to make, best use of that. And then just in terms of pure science, we're going to continue to have more fundamental advances in novel modalities like CRISPR and others that we think are going to create really interesting new products that go after areas of unmet need that'll be independent of technology.
And keeping that projection to the future, and maybe building on what you said, maybe taking it in a different direction. What's coming next for Novo Growth?
I think it's more of the same in that we have capital to invest, that we continue our focus on the life sciences, and we're continuing to look for companies that want to build value over the long term. And so for us, we have always been and always will be life sciences investors. And we want to work with companies that can go and see the value in having a partner that's committed to the space and can hopefully bring some expertise, whether you're focused and have a lot of technology expertise already, or that we can be an investor that's providing a lot of the experience and value you want an investor. We want to work with businesses that are going to go the distance in the long term.
I love that image and that goal. And if we can ever help on that front, please do let us know. But before we come to a close today, Jeffrey, just a few rapid fire questions to cap things off. Given the current state of the markets as well as innovation, do you have any advice for founders right now?
We want to have discussions with founders, and we know people are considering many different things out there. The markets are, not what they were. And so people are deciding what they would like to do with their businesses, what the path forward is. And for us, we like to make sure that we are in that dialogue and continuing speaking with companies, getting to know them over time, and finding ways to, partner with folks that, make sense to be long-term investments for us. So we say, get in touch early, get to know us, and we may be, a fit for you. We may not, but, we'd like to get to know you over time, and we can then get to know each other. And, we think that leads to the best outcomes.
No, it's a great message. I guess last thing, just to wrap it off, any closing thoughts, shameless plugs, anything we missed that you'd like to share?
Novo Growth is one of the largest life sciences investors in the world, and we would love to go and partner with you.
It's a great message to cap things off with. Jeffrey, thank you for an absolutely fantastic episode. We're really grateful for your time and hope to have you back soon. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you.